It's a very appropriate song, both for the theme today and for the scripture. Before we get to the scripture, though, I want to give you just a little bit of background. It comes from Luke, and it's a familiar story. But we need to know what was happening in the chapter before. Because Luke gives us a number of stories of what was going on. I'll let you maybe have a chance to go back to Luke 18 and read what's going on. But just real briefly, there's the story of the unjust judge and the widow who kept pestering him. The judge finally gave in, not because he wanted necessarily to do what was right, but because he got tired of being badgered. The Pharisee and the tax collector were in the temple. Tax collector who recognized that he needed God's grace, and the Pharisee who said, "Boy, I thank God I'm not like everybody else, especially this tax collector." And then Jesus had the opportunity to bless children when others were trying to say, "You don't want to have anything to do with them. They're not worth anything." He also then met the rich ruler who was unwilling to leave everything behind. And finally, he came across blind Bartimaeus, the man who needed to be healed. And then we get to today's scripture, which is kind of a neat, fun story. At least we think it is. Jesus was passing through Jericho. A man named Zacchaeus was there. He was the director of the tax collectors, and he was rich. He tried to see who Jesus was, but Zacchaeus was a small man, and he couldn't see Jesus because of the crowd. So Zacchaeus ran ahead and climbed a fig tree to see Jesus, who was coming that way. When Jesus came to the tree, he looked up and said, "Zacchaeus, come down. I must stay at your house today." Zacchaeus came down and was glad to welcome Jesus into his home. Later at dinner, Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Lord, I'll give half my property to the poor. I'll pay 4 times as much as I owe to those I've cheated in any way." Then Jesus said to Zacchaeus, "You and your family have been saved today. Indeed, the Son of Man has come to seek and to save people who are lost." That's a fun story. I don't know how many of you remember the little Sunday school song, at least I remember. Zacchaeus was a wee little man. Yeah, we know, yeah. I think that's the only Sunday school song I remember. But it sounds like a feel-good, fun story that we can share with our kids, right? Not really. There's a lot more to it if we break it down. Because we've tended to romanticize it. I mean, Zacchaeus was not a nice guy. He was a tax collector, and I know we don't like the IRS, but I mean, we really didn't like the tax collectors then. And not only was he a tax collector, he was the chief of the tax collectors. Okay, meant he was a thief, an extortionist, and a traitor. Because as a tax collector, he made his living by not just collecting what was due to Rome, but by collecting whatever else he could on top of that, extorting what he could. He was a traitor because as a Jew, he was working for the occupying force. Probably the closest equivalent I can think of would be like some of the Jews who worked for the Nazis during the Holocaust. It's that kind of an attitude. So why did he want to see Jesus? I don't know. Maybe he was just curious. Maybe he'd heard enough about this guy who was turning things upside down that, okay, I'm going to go find out what's going on. Maybe he had heard something that was going to, that touched him a little bit. I don't know. But he wanted to see him. Apparently, at least according to some translations of the scripture, he was short. Sean, you could relate to that. But he wasn't liked, obviously. And so I don't know what it would have been like for him trying to push his way through the crowd to get to the tree. I have a hunch that if I had been living then, I probably would have been one of those who would have elbowed him a little bit as he tried to shove away or to step on his toes. You know, you could treat him a little bit uglier in a crowd than you could one-on-one, because if Zacchaeus turned to me and said, "Why'd you do that?" "Well, I'm sorry, I got shoved." "Yeah, I got shoved." But he got there, and he got in the tree, and then what happened? Jesus saw him. He really saw him. And Jesus invited himself to dinner. I have no idea what Zacchaeus' wife must have felt like. Because you've got this guy, I don't know if it was just Jesus, or if it was Jesus and the people that were with him. And all of a sudden you've got all of these folks showing up for dinner. And this is where I feel kind of like Paul Harvey. I wish we knew the rest of the story. Because I really don't know what happened. I have no idea what they talked about. But something happened, and Zacchaeus was transformed. The changes that he said, and it wasn't just a change in his mind. He made major changes, because the reparation that he was going to make was far larger than Jewish law required. It was 4 times, in some cases, as much as he would have been required. And he was also doing what John the Baptist had told tax collectors to do, which was only pay, or only, not extort, only collect what you're supposed to, which would have put him out of business. So did he continue being a tax collector? I don't know. What did the community react? How did they react to him? Would they have believed that he could have been transformed so quickly? I don't know. They might have said, yeah, right, I'll believe it when I see it. Or they might have said, yeah, I still don't trust him. But something happened. Jesus welcomed Zacchaeus. He saw behind the mask that he put on for everybody else, the false self that Zacchaeus thought he was. And Jesus helped him see that he really was a beloved child of God, that he really was good. Because of all of that interaction, and then Jesus welcoming Zacchaeus, Zacchaeus then also welcomed Jesus into his life and allowed him to transform him. Okay, so what does that story have to do with us today? I mean, most of us aren't extortioners or thieves or traitors. But we're here, coming to this table where Jesus welcomes us. And I imagine that most of us have come saying, Jesus, you're welcome into my life as well, just like Zacchaeus did. But I sometimes wonder just which Jesus are we welcoming? And what I mean by that is that in a lot of ways, we have tended to try and tame and domesticate Jesus so that we can come on Sunday mornings. We can listen to what's said, we nod our heads in agreement and say, yeah, that's right. And then we go home. And we might have been touched, but we've not allowed that Jesus to change us or transform us. I've been reading a new book by someone that I really respect and think is in a lot of ways a modern day prophet. And he said, whenever Jesus of Nazareth, his actual teachings, his lived example, and his loving and life-giving way, liberating way, whenever that Jesus takes center stage, a revolution of love, a reformation of life, and a renewal of our relationship with God, each other, and all of creation is at hand. So that's the challenge. Is that the Jesus that we are welcoming today? That Jesus was one who said, who's your neighbor? Who are you willing to help? That Jesus is one who sat with the unacceptable, who reached out to the friendless and the needy, who said that when we give the hungry food or drink, clothe the naked, take in the stranger, visit the sick and the prisoners, we're doing that to him. That's the Jesus who said, blessed are the peacemakers, who said, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. You can't serve God in wealth. Love your neighbor the same way you love yourself. That's the Jesus who gave his life for others. That's the Jesus who's calling us to this table today. And if we really welcome him the way Zacchaeus did, we'll be transformed. We're at Open Arms, and we chose that name specifically because we want it to be something different. We want it to be changed. I think everybody who's here has been transformed in some way, changed in some way. I know I have. If you had asked me 20, 25 years ago where I'd be attending church, it would not have been at a congregation like Open Arms. It would have been a more traditional kind of a congregation. But the time I have spent here, I've come to see a lot of people in a lot of different ways. Experienced growth with individuals that I don't know I would have come in contact with any other way. Been challenged to see with new eyes. If we welcome Jesus the way Zacchaeus did, we will continue to be called out of our comfort zones. We will be called to live counterculturally. Will not be comfortable, and it won't necessarily be easy. But it requires both strength and vulnerability. Because can you imagine the kind of strength that it took for Zacchaeus, both to climb the tree and then to make that huge a transformation in his life? We're challenged today to look deeper into ourselves, to see past the false self, the masks that we put on to ourselves and to others, and to find the true self that's created in the image of God, the true self that is good. So how do we do that? Well, in 2007, we were given some counsel as a church that I think helps us understand some of the things that we're called to do. I want to read several verses from that for us. Courageously challenge cultural, political, and religious trends that are contrary to the reconciling and restoring purposes of God. Pursue peace. There are subtle yet powerful influences in the world, some even claiming to represent Christ, that seek to divide people and nations to accomplish their destructive aims. That which seeks to harden one human heart against another by constructing walls of fear and prejudice is not of God. God, the eternal Creator, weeps for the poor, displaced, and mistreated of the world because of their unnecessary suffering. Such conditions are not God's will. Open your ears to hear the pleading of mothers and fathers in all nations who desperately seek a future of hope for their children. Do not turn away from them, for in their welfare resides your welfare. The earth, lovingly created as an environment for life to flourish, shudders in distress because creation's natural and living systems are becoming exhausted from carrying the burden of human greed and conflict. Humankind must awake from its illusion of independence and unrestrained consumption without lasting consequences. God is calling for a prophetic community to emerge, drawn from the nations of the world, that is characterized by uncommon devotion to the compassion and peace of God revealed in Jesus Christ. That's the Jesus who welcomes us to this table today. The Jesus who wants to help us see ourselves, our true selves, as beloved children of God, so that our lives can really be transformed. And so that we then have that opportunity to share that same opportunity for transformation to those that we come in contact with and the world. Jesus welcomes us to this table. Let us welcome him into our lives.